Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. In this presentation, we are calling Navigating Through Uncharted Territory. My name is Terry Goolsby, and I'm with Christine Miller. Christine is a partner, and I am a senior vice president at Horizons Stewardship. And we are both flag-waving, card-carrying Episcopalians by choice. We're grateful for this opportunity to be with you today and to share with you some information that we find both encouraging and helpful. So let's get started, shall we? The bullets on this coming slide will come as no surprise to you. It's a different world that we are living in today. It's an exciting time to find the new and innovative ways that we are continuing to provide ministry in our local parishes. I'm referring to this as kind of the meantime. Meaning that basically we're between what was and what will be. So also it has a double-edged meaning in that this is really a mean time with COVID-19 and all that we're doing. So we're going to talk about the next normal, and I want to share with you a little bit about my parish and some of the unique things that I've been seeing in other parishes as well. So for Easter Sunday, we were basically worshiping online with streaming, but the neat thing was that we had recorded a number of our parishioners using the typical Easter greeting, "The Lord is risen, the Lord is risen indeed." And it included all stripes of folks. It was different races, different ages. There were children bouncing on a trampoline. There were families dressed in their backyards in their very finest Easter Sunday clothing. And there were teenagers in the midst of a basketball game who stopped to say, "The Lord is risen, the Lord is risen indeed." So we have continued to be pretty creative in some of the things that we're doing, and I know that you have been as well. The on-site activities that have been taking place in our church haven't been, frankly. Many of us have kind of been locked out, so we have not stopped ministering. We simply have stopped ministering within those four walls of our church. Another thing that did not stop was the need to connect God-given resources to God-inspired vision. That's called funding the ministries of the church, frankly. Christine and I have talked to countless churches, frankly, over the last 4 months, and here are some of the common questions that we've been hearing. Do we even talk about giving with our people? How do we talk to our people about giving? What should we be doing and not doing? What should we be saying and not saying? And how do we keep giving strong? In other words, how do we navigate through this uncharted territory when it comes to stewardship, giving, and generosity? And at Horizons, we believe there are 5 principles, 5 key directional markers every church should keep front and center to keep funding robust and ministry strong and impactful. So Christine is going to share with you some of those core values we at Horizons feel are foundational to the ministry of generosity. Christine?
Thanks, Terry. Why is growing generosity important? Many of you might be saying, well, of course it's important because we need to fund ministry. Growing generosity is important to fund ministry, but it's also an essential part of our journey as followers of Christ. If we believe that all we have and all we are is a gift from God, then what we do with those gifts has everything to do with our journey of faith. There are lots of great scriptures on giving and generosity, the widow's mite, the rich ruler, the cheerful giver. We know all of these by heart. But the scripture I think is most helpful, at least to me, is one not most frequently used in our church around fall stewardship season, but John 3:16. John 3:16 is a great scripture on stewardship because it tells us about God's character. It tells us that first God loved and then God gave. As people born in God's image, as we grow in generosity, we become closer to the person God intended us to be. We also think of generosity as a journey. We talk about it being grounded in gratitude, revealed through prayer, and lived in faith. Beginning with gratitude is essential because in expressing our gratitude, we also acknowledge that all those things that we have been given to us by God. Through prayer, we invite God into the process of our decision making. And then by faith, we acknowledge that we're willing to do what God intends us to do rather than what we want to do. So these are the generosity concepts that are at the core of our work. Terry mentioned the five guiding principles here on this generosity compass, and we're going to take a deeper dive into each one of them, so I'm simply going to introduce them to you here. At the center of the generosity compass, of course, is keeping it spiritual. Keeping it spiritual means focusing on those biblical teachings around giving and generosity and the relationship between giving and discipleship. At the north point of the compass is the principle of relationships. Building donor relationships is so critical to encouraging increasing donations and also keeping donors for a lifetime. To the east is ask, about making the ask. How we ask, how often we ask, when we ask is all so vitally important to help us to grow generosity and build relationships. At the west is telling the story of impact and how we communicate to donors about the impact that their generosity is having on the lives of other people. And then finally, to the south is effectiveness. We need to be able to measure effectiveness to determine if our generosity strategies are actually moving the needle. So we'll cover each of these in a bit more detail, and Terry's going to get us started.
Thanks. So the center is that starting place, remembering that for the church and the follower of Christ, all things financial are frankly spiritual. And I love that statement. The biblical teaching around stewardship, giving, and generosity tell us that everything that we are, everything that we have is a blessing and a gift from a generous God. We're reminded in Scripture that those blessings still belong to God, which means that every time we make any financial decision, we are making a decision about someone else's possessions, that someone else is God. We need to be sure that we're bringing God into the decision-making process, not an afterthought, but rather the first thought. In navigating through these unexpected and unanticipated days with new decisions to be made and choices to be explored, make conversation with God the starting place before moving any place on this generosity compass. And remember that generosity begins with God. It is a response to God's generosity. And remember that there is a direct correlation between our financial life and our faith life. And I'm going to be personal here. It took me a long time to figure that one out. 4 practical applications of this principle are: bring stewardship, giving, and generosity into the preaching and teaching year-round, not just when there is a need or a crisis or it's our annual stewardship focus. I think of our founder, Cliff Christopher, who talks about churches that are always in crisis mode, saying, oh, we've got to have you increase your giving because of such. And he puts a correlation to that, an idea of a sinking ship. And frankly, no one wants to give to a sinking ship. So bringing stewardship to more of a year-round focus, providing at least one church-wide generosity opportunity each year, and that for us in the Episcopal Church, that's typically our annual fall stewardship drive. Making certain that stewardship, giving, and generosity are included in your church's discipleship path and curriculum. In other words, you're teaching about it. Here's a unique one. I've been doing this with an Episcopal parish in Washington, D.C. That is, create a written theology of stewardship. It gives clarity to what you believe as a people of faith and helps you as you work through that process of even filling committees and such. And Horizons has developed resources for each one of these 4 applications, and Christine will now talk about those resources a little bit actually later in the presentation. Stewardship and generosity are not just about our relationship with God, but also our relationship with each other. Remember, resources always follow relationships. And so, Christine, will you share with us what that means with relational communications?
I will. And Terry, we're getting some chat that your microphone is cutting in and out, just getting a little static. So I don't know if you want to maybe mute yourself and then maybe try unmuting, and maybe that'll resolve the challenge. So hopefully we'll get you
Perfect.
back.
I'll do that.
Ahead. Yeah, thanks. Relational communication. When people make a contribution to your church, they're sending you a message. What they're doing is expressing that they want to be in relationship with you. And often the amount of their gift is the reflection of the importance of that relationship in their minds. Just like when we give a gift to someone that we care about, the gift is often an expression of our affection for that particular person. In many churches, we find that churches frequently ask, sometimes beg, sometimes even threaten, inviting their givers to give more and more without ever expressing gratitude. Saying thank you lets the donor know that she is appreciated, and writing an effective thank you note is one of the quickest ways for growing giving and developing lifelong donors. Researcher Penelope Burke has interviewed over 500,000 donors and discovered that donors want to receive a prompt and personal thank you note that lets the donor know that her generosity made a difference. She also suggests that gratitude should not be expressed for the giver or for the gift, but rather for the giver. And last, every church has a group of people who are heavily invested in the ministries of the church. These givers should be invited into conversations regarding the long-term vision and invited to weigh in and be a part of its success. One of the practical applications of these principles is writing an effective get your attention thank you note. And I'm going to take you through a couple of examples of those. First, here is what we would typically see in the life of the church. You have seen many, many, many of these and perhaps have written a few even. Starts out with, dear member. Obviously, the church doesn't know my name because they've called me member. Thank you for my recent pledge of $1,000. So what they really are saying is, we love your money. Not you so much, but we love your money. Support from donors like you is critical to our work. That statement isn't inherently bad, but it does diminish the emphasis on that one specific donor by suggesting that she is part of a group of donors, not that she herself is the one who's valued. And then, of course, we always have to remind people about how particularly challenging our year has been and that we're running a deficit. So we always beg for a little bit more before we finally close. All of this suggests to the donor, I value your money. I don't particularly value you. I really don't even know your name. Our church is sinking, and we hope that you'll consider giving us even more to make us survive. Sincerely, your business administrator. That is a very, very typical thank you note, told with a little bit of cynicism. Now, here's an alternative. Think about if you were to receive a note like this. Dear Christine, I wanted you to know how much St. John's Youth Group has meant to me. I was fortunate enough to be able to go on the Nicaragua mission trip. And while I was there, I realized how God was nudging me to study medicine so I could help people in countries where medical help is needed. Because of St. John's, I'm now entering the pre-med program at University of Michigan. Thank you for your generosity and support of the youth program. You have made it possible for me to find God's purpose for my life. Sincerely, Amy Logan. Now, I don't know about you, but if I received a thank you note like that, I'd probably hang on to it for a while and read it more than once, because we're really expressing to the donor, thank you for being you. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your investment in this ministry, which has had an impact on the life of Amy Logan. That will get the donor's attention. All right, make sure your thank you notes are the kind your donors want to hang on to, that you'll find in the donor's drawer many, many years later. And now Terry's going to talk through the third principle of making the ask, hopefully with a really good microphone.
I was going to say, we're going to see if this mic is any better.
Yes, it sounds
All
good.
right. So quite honestly, for those of you who are on the call, there's a fan right next to me softly blowing. That may have been the issue with the mic. So I've turned it off, and if I start sweating, you're going to understand exactly why. So I love this phrase, and it's not original to me by any means, and that is that the church doesn't have a giving problem. It actually has an asking problem. And the irony is that we have no issue with asking people to volunteer their time, to be in a choir, to be on a mission trip, to involve themselves in some other ministry of the church. But when it comes to asking for money, there's a hesitancy there. And the hesitancy is making the same bold ask, moving beyond that hesitancy to make it as bold an ask as you would asking someone else to serve in some capacity in the church. If you want your parishioners to be generous in their giving, frankly, you must ask them to give, and you must ask them to be generous. Research has shown that the number one reason people don't give is that they haven't ever been truly asked. And I'm mindful in a capital campaign some years ago when my campaign chair was expected to be the top donor. And I asked the priest at the time, I said, have you made that appointment to sit down with your campaign chair and make that ask? And this priest said, no, he's going to do it. I assure you he's going to do it. And I said, I assure you, you need to make the ask. Toward the end of the capital campaign, we found that that campaign chair didn't rise to the level that we had prepared and thought that he might. And the priest was frankly angry. And I said, take a week or so, calm down, and go back to your campaign chair and just say, start a conversation with saying, you know, be honest and say, I was thinking you were going to maybe be our top donor. His answer was, Father, you didn't ask me. That's the basis of the story. He knew what he was supposed to be doing, we thought, but he hadn't been asked. So we could take a full hour about this one topic, and for the sake of time and the length of this presentation, we are simply going to encourage you as a church leader to challenge yourself to become, if you are not already, bold in this area of making that ask. The only thing they can tell you is no. When you have your people together in worship, encourage them to be givers through effective offering talks. When they visit your church's website, make certain that it's easy for them to navigate it and to get to your giving page, and just as easy to make that gift. Make certain that when people join your parish, the opportunities to give are part of that teaching of what it means to be a member of your parish. And for those of you who are still a bit skittish, I'm going to refer to the great and revered theologian Henry Nouwen, and I'm going to paraphrase what he says. Raising money for ministry is inviting people into a new way of relating to their resources. It's giving them the opportunity to put their resources at the disposal of the kingdom of God. Raising money for ministry is a way of announcing both your vision and then inviting other people into your mission. In making it prayerful, we slowly experience a reorientation of all our thoughts and feelings about ourselves and others. If you want your folks to be generous, you have to ask them to be generous. And I've found several priests that I've worked with who have said to me, Terry, I can ask them to pray about being generous or about a specific ask. That's easier for me than just to say, hey, Bob, can I count on you for $50,000, which is never a good way to approach anyone in any fashion. But that prayerful request is often that softening moment that is encouraging for many of the priests that I've worked with. Christine, how do we know if our efforts are effective when moving the needle as far as becoming successful in what we're doing? And you're muted.
It was like a comedy of errors all of a sudden. Don't you love technology?
Love it.
Measuring effectiveness. So effective strategies emerge from tracking quality data. And for those of you who are data junkies like I am, this may be exciting, the exciting part for you. But knowing what data is saying to you is really important to enable you to respond to both opportunities and potential concerns that might be emerging. For example, one of the first signs that there's a pastoral concern or issue with the family might be signaled by the fact that that donor stopped contributing or just stopped giving, particularly in times such as this, where we're not connected on a weekly basis or even less frequently than that. We have people that maybe have dropped off in their giving and might be a signal that they've lost a job or have otherwise had some sort of a health issue. And so we need to be concerned about that. Other key metrics will help you to set important generosity strategies. For example, most churches track the mean or the average. In fact, it's included in our parochial reports. So churches are required to be tracking that. The mean or the average used to be particularly relevant when there was kind of an 80-20 split, with 20% of the donors providing 80% of the resources. Then you could kind of look at the average and it would make some sense to track it to see if it was growing. In most of our churches, and you all know perhaps what the split is in your particular environment, but in most cases, we are looking at a 10 to 90 split. So 10% of the families providing 90% of the resources. In one church I'm working with right now, I have one donor household providing 10% of the resources. So it's really, really important to know that split, but also to look at some of the other metrics that might help you to add meaning to that mean or average. So here's a couple of ways that you might do that. And I want to mention this too. There are a few software platforms out there. We work with an organization called Tools for Church, Tools and then a for Church. And it's a software program that enables you to have quick and reliable access to your giving data. It will interact with ACS or Shelby or whatever church management software program that you are using, and it can tell you very quickly what's happening in your church and give you a snapshot of key areas that might have impactful strategies associated with them. So, first-time giver strategy is a great way to use data. When a donor gives to you for the first time, that donor is saying something, again, wanting to build a relationship. Lots of research out there about first-time donors, but one of the most helpful research study that I saw noted that first-time donors often don't make a second gift, and the reason that they give is because they were asked for a second gift before they were thanked for the first one. So we need to make sure that we're thanking our first-time donors first before we ask them again. Donor retention is a huge issue with churches and nonprofits, and one of the ways that we can make sure that a first-time donor makes a second and third and fourth contribution is putting together a process and strategy for building relationships with that donor. Also, knowing when a donor falls off the radar is critically important. We want to be able to set strategies to either implement some pastoral care or reconnect that giver into some area of ministry in the life of the church. And then median. Median is my favorite statistic. All my colleagues know it. I talk about it a lot. But median, for those of you who aren't statistically savvy, the median gift is just, if you stack them highest to lowest, what's that one in the middle? And if you look at that number and you can see it inching up year after year after year, you know your entire parish family has had movement and has grown in their generosity. So use those statistics. Those are just the first ones to look at: mean, median, and mode. There's lots of other metrics to be used, but those are the ones to begin with. And again, using some sort of a software platform such as Tools for Church will give you some great visuals to enable you to do that more effectively. Terry, tell us a little bit about telling the story of ministry.
Yeah, so I think it's one of the most powerful tools that we have is in storytelling. it's with respect to at least growing giving and generosity in the church. And what we're talking about is stories that are transformative and life-changing because of the ministry of your church. And then helping people see that the story happened in part because of their giving through their church. People love to hear stories of how lives are being changed, and they'll remember those powerful stories well beyond the hearing of the story, and they will be inspired and motivated to give, to create even more stories of life change. So I'm going to tell a story about my former church in Virginia. We would tell an impact story every single Sunday before the offertory. Various people shared. It would be the pastor. It would be a person who was a lay leader in that particular ministry, or it might be a person who was affected by a ministry of the church. They only lasted 60 seconds. So now already you're thinking about some of your parishioners that you would never let do this because they could never tell that story in 60 seconds. So you have to be concise, but the point is that it's a life-changing story and you can reference it to what you've been doing in ministry. But the closing of that life-changing story was always something like this. Thank you, church, for your giving. Your generosity makes this story possible. With every opportunity to tell your church a story of life change, connect it and giving and generosity to these stories. Always express gratitude and invite young people or your people to become storytellers. The greatest compliment that came from that church in Virginia was a parishioner who came up to me in the fall one year and said, you know, I don't really think we need this annual stewardship focus this year. We get a stewardship focus every single week in those offering talks. Man, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's the greatest compliment I'd heard. She was connecting ministry and generosity and giving together. So that process underscored not only something that my son often says, and Christine, I have heard her say this too, is not only why should I give, but why should I give to you as a church? And so what this does is it says, we are doing good things. And as a result of your giving, this is what's happening within our ministries of outreach and missions. So no question about it, we are in a season that is both unfamiliar and unmapped, but there is a compass and there are directional markers for navigating forward and not looking back. Remembering that number one, giving is a spiritual activity that starts with God's generosity. Number two, giving is about people and relationships at the end of the day. People and relationships are why Christ came to this earth. Generous people, and generous giving is always connected to a relationship. Number three, giving typically follows an ask and seldom happens without one. Number four, measuring effectiveness is about being good stewards of God's possessions. Number five, and telling the church's story of changing lives and helping your people see how their giving is connected to these stories is a powerful way to grow giving and encourage new givers. And I'm going to share from a personal experience. I helped 4 different parishes last fall with their annual stewardship around these 5 principles. I'm not bragging, but I will tell you that those churches saw an increase of 16% in committed dollars toward their operating budget and new first-time commitments from new households that had been in the parish for a number of years. And the largest was a church in Washington, D.C. that saw a 45% increase to their committed givers, or to committed giving, and also an increase in new pledgers or givers. So follow those 5 principles, and it will lead you in that direction of helping your people become far more generous and great stewards. Christine.
Thanks, Terry. So this is just a reminder of those 5 principles and what we're calling the generosity compass, because as Terry said earlier, there is no map for a time such as this. But we feel like this generosity compass will help to guide you to greater ministry funding and the ability to do more of what God is calling you to do. Terry and I are just so grateful for the opportunity to have been with you. And we are also amazingly grateful for all the work that you've been doing and that you will continue to do to get through this very challenging time. We have seen amazing creativity and work coming from the churches that we are affiliated with. And we are just amazed at all of you. I'd also just like to point out Giving 365. If you have not already subscribed, you can go to that site. It is a free resource that Horizons provides to our clients and to churches who need some resources to help grow giving in their churches. On Giving 365, we've just actually launched a new site, so it's a lot easier to find what you're looking for. But there's videos, there's webinars, there's ebooks, there's all kinds of great tools and resources that help you maybe take a little bit deeper dive into some of the stuff that Terry and I just covered. So we invite you to take a look there. Also, our emails are listed there, so please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And I'm going to take a glance into the chat room and see what people have to say.
Christine, while you're looking, I did see one question about the Henry Nouwen quotes.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and keep reading and I'll talk for a second.
Sure.
Yes, we can add those quotes to probably the end of this presentation before we send it out. I'd also encourage folks, if you don't have his small little book, The Spirituality of Fundraising, go get it. It's at henrynouwen.org, HenryNouwen.org. And it used to be free. I don't think it is now. I think there's a small cost, maybe because I was referring so many people to it. But Christine probably has it on her bookshelf right there beside her. And so,
I do. In fact, there's a new version, the little pamphlet that used to be out there.
yeah.
So Henry Nouwen's colleagues has taken that book and created it into a workbook. So the entirety of the spirituality of fundraising is in here, but it's also in a workbook format. And this is a great tool for Bible study or small groups, anything that you want to do. So yeah, I encourage you to grab this. It's a great resource. Just happen to have it on hand.
I will also say, since my mic was breaking up, I had written out my comments, and someone had said, Terry, you were talking so fast I couldn't write them all down. So let me provide those in case my mic was splitting at different points, and you'll have the context of what I was saying. Is that fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. Other questions that you saw, Christine?
So comments and suggestions that would have said or even thought to have said last January before the pandemic. And some questions about how does what we just talked about change with the pandemic. And Terry, you might have some comments on this as well. To me, the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. What we talk about and how we talk about is still the same. That has not changed. Absolutely, the delivery of those principles and how you implement those in your annual process will change significantly. Doing an offering talk online is very different than doing an offering talk from the altar. So finding ways to modify it to your context. I know some of our churches are back in church. Many of our churches are doing outdoor worship. Some of our churches are still worshiping with the rector in the living room. So we've got churches all over the place experiencing things in very different ways. But I think that that the fundamentals, how we talk about it, those compass points absolutely still hold true during a pandemic or not. And that's what we're hoping that you'll see from this. Terry, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just think that we're doing far more things electronically now than we were a year ago. So those offering talks can be done with your iPhone in your den and done in 60 seconds and then dropped into a service. And that's easy for me to say because I haven't had to put a service together. But I'm just finding that much more has to be done either mail or electronically than we did in years past, as we're moving forward. Yeah. And a sensitivity to where we are in the world today, no doubt.
Some folks are asking about our presentation, and absolutely all of it will be available to you through SEEP. So you will have all of these slides available to you. Someone has asked, we have folks dropping into worship with us online, and we aren't equipped to make digital giving really easy for people. Do you have any recommendations for digital giving? My recommendation is you don't have a choice. You absolutely must do digital giving. We have been working with churches. I don't know, Terry, how many you've done. We've done dozens of website analyses for churches to make sure that the processes that they're inviting their potential givers into is one that is easy to navigate, it's quick, effective, and efficient. If you don't have a website, or you're not happy with your website, or you don't know about third-party providers, please send us an email and we'll send to you some resources on that. But digital giving is no longer an option. It's absolutely critical. Anything you want to add, Terry, to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I would say that we have at least one church we're aware of that was really heavily into electronic giving, but they still had some of their members who liked writing checks. And so what they did in the midst of COVID was they just sent those church members stamped envelopes with the return address of the church on it, to allow the ease. A lot of folks don't even want to go into the post office right now. So that was a surprise to us in a church that was so effectively using electronic giving, to see that their actual check writing usage was up. But they made it easier for their members by sending them self-addressed stamped envelopes, if you will.
Yeah, another, which I've heard very, many of my churches have had success with that too. One thing that somebody had mentioned here about digital giving, with the fees involved, again, digital giving, just not even an option anymore. ACH Transactions, clearly the most cost effective, but you can also invite your donors to check a box that says that they will cover the processing fees that you're being charged by the credit card company, whoever's your third-party provider. Most of the time, churches are finding that donors will check that box and they will cover that $3.95 or $5 or whatever it is, that additional expense that you are experiencing because of those transactions. Someone also mentioned that the local diocesan office has offered to help process online payments for small churches, and I know that's true for some dioceses that I've talked to as well. Here's a great question. In this new COVID online worshiping format, churches are seeing all kinds of new people participating in worship, and they may not know who you are, or there's an IP address, but there's no person attached to it, so you don't know how to connect with those people. Terry, I'm sure you've seen some ways that churches are handling this as well. But my experience has been, I see churches putting on their website, when they're doing their live stream, they're inviting people to fill out a new member form and send it in to the church. So there is that communication. What have you seen, Terry, in that regard?
Basically the same thing, but the encouraging thing was that I've actually seen people joining the church as a result of online worship and the opportunity to become a member because they were invited, frankly, to do that. Yeah, for some of us, it's hard to kind of reach out to those because, like you said, all we have is an IP address. But making ourselves as available to folks is, I guess, incredibly and vitally important. There is no doubt about it.
One of the churches I'm working with, they have had, it's a church in Toledo, Ohio, and the priest there is a friend of mine, and she's had people worshiping with her from, I don't know, I think it was 12 different countries. Now, those people may or may not become long-term members, but I think that we've eliminated, to some extent, geography from the decision-making process about where people want to worship. And so inviting people to worship with you, regardless of where they live in the world, is valuable. If they find what they're looking for through your worship service, then perhaps they want to be a donor as well.
Yeah. I want to go back and speak to something that I was struggling with for a long time, and that was credit card giving and that loss of that 3%. And it was my oldest son, who is an international banker, who said to his stewardship committee, I don't own checks, and I'm a banker. And the only way that I have business transactions is with my credit card. And frankly, wouldn't you rather have my monthly gift by credit card and lose that 3%, so to speak, than not to have it, because I'm not going to write you a check? And so I thought that whole sense of losing that 3%, until I heard him say, wouldn't you rather perhaps even lose the 3%? And as Christine has said, if you just simply say, would you cover the cost of your gift through use of credit card? And he was honest, and he said, I do this because I want the points. Mm-hmm. And I thought that too. I didn't like that idea. But this is the world that he lives in, and I have to accept that that's the world he lives in. And he did agree to increase his gift by that 3% cost of using his credit card. So we've got to move in that direction. When we come back into our churches, for a long time, we will not be passing the offering plate as a result of COVID-19. So we have to find new and creative ways to help people with their stewardship.
Yeah. One of our chat room folks also reminded us that checks and cash also have costs associated with them to process. So no such thing as a free donation, I guess, is the bottom line there. So again, Terry and I are just so grateful for your time today. I know your time is extraordinarily valuable, and we just wish you well, and hope that you will let us know if there's anything we can ever do to be of help to you. And sign up for Giving 365 and go find some free resources that will give you additional information and insights into how you might grow generosity in your church.
Great.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.